At this time, I'd like to ask Deborah Ferrone, our 1995 president, to join me on stage and make a few comments about our Legacy Award. As you saw earlier, 14 of our past presidents are here with us tonight. We remember, though, someone who is no longer with us, Susan Benjamin, our very first president back in 1992, who passed away late last year. Deborah is here to share with us her memories of Susan.
Legacy is an interesting principle. When our committee started to work on this program and started to think about the 20th anniversary, no one would have guessed that the founder of the LMA chapter, Susan Benjamin, would be passing away. And in fact, she passed away just a few weeks into the planning of the program. How poignant it was to all of us that Susan, who is our founder and one of the architects of LMA, embodied the spirit of what each of us honors today. There are still a few of us who will remember Susan as she would take the train in from Connecticut with a group of other people from Cummings and Lockwood, and she would gather the first group of about 15 of us who had roles in the profession. If we could make it out of our office, and we were fortunate enough to do that, we would meet at the Williams Club. Susan was persistent, and in fact, she served as our president for the first 2 years, and it was because most likely it was a job that no one else really wanted. It was a tough job to have. People didn't really know what was going to happen with the profession, and no one felt like they could get the time to get out of their office. But Susan insisted that a New York chapter get off the ground. And so if you ask anyone here tonight who's been in the marketing profession for over a decade, their impressions of Susan, you'll hear a reoccurring theme. If you ask Eva Wisnik, if you ask Sally Feldman, if you ask Amy Fisher, Amy, who worked with Susan during her years together at Schulte, Roth & Zabel, and who remained the apple of Susan's eye for many years after, and Linda Orton, who you just heard speak, who moved from Chicago to New York, everyone is likely to tell you that Susan was a good friend of theirs and that Susan was a mentor. She meant so much to all of us. And in many cases, people will say that it's because of Susan Benjamin that they ended up going into law firm marketing, whether it was by taking the time to meet a candidate who was interested in going into the field or lending a hand to someone who was relocating to the East Coast. Susan was one of those people who always took the time to help. She would always have lunch or a cup of coffee with someone. She never said no. And once in those positions, Susan would then encourage that person to stick with it, to make sure that they really believed that their job was one worth doing. And if she felt that someone felt too challenged by a job, she'd send them a note of encouragement, or she'd send them a thoughtful letter when they joined a new firm. Susan was so responsible for motivating and encouraging so many of us in this room, and it was those small acts of everyday kindness that made all of the difference. It made Susan such a class act for many of us to admire. But Susan left us a legacy. She left us knowing each other, knowing that we had made friends in this organization. She left a family, including her husband, Dr. Bert Benjamin, 3 wonderful sons, Daniel, Bill, and Jonathan, and their families, including lovely wives and several grandchildren. Susan left a legacy of giving back to charities. She supported a number of Jewish community programs, healthcare programs, and the injustice of poverty. Susan left us a legacy of starting LMA, an organization that would provide support, camaraderie, and education to hundreds of people, and who would learn essential skills that they would pass on to others. And today, for those of us in this room, Susan left us a legacy to remember that it's not the SWOT analysis or strategic breakthroughs that we're going to come up with that matter in the end, but those everyday acts of kindness to our lawyers, to our colleagues, to one another that really mean so much. For those of us who knew Susan through LMA, losing her makes us remember our own roots and the legacy we ourselves hope to leave. I know it would mean a great deal to Susan to be remembered in this way. Thank you.